He might be posting, partying, even smiling like he's moved on. But don't be fooled. What he shows the world is a mask. What he feels in the silence is the truth. Because silence, that's where his emotions scream the loudest. And when you're no longer reaching out, no longer chasing, that's when the emotional attachment starts to expose itself. Stay with me, because I'm about to break down the signs he's faking it and why your silence is the most powerful thing you've ever done. He can act like he's over it. He can post the pictures, go out with friends, even start casually dating someone new. On the surface, it might look like he's fine, like the breakup didn't shake him. But silence, true, uninterrupted silence, does something that no social media highlight reel can hide. It creates space, and in that space, there are no distractions. There's no one clapping for the performance. That's when the truth begins to echo. Not your voice, not your messages, just the internal voice he's been trying to mute with noise. That silence doesn't just expose the truth. It forces him to face it. And that's where things get real. Silence acts like a mirror, and the thing about mirrors is they don't lie. When you were around, he could use your energy to distract himself from what he was feeling. The attention, the conversation, the comfort, it made it easy for him to pretend he was okay. But now, without that, there's no one else to blame, no drama to point at, no texts to ignore as a power move. There's just him. The reality that your presence is gone. That absence echoes louder than any breakup speech or goodbye message. In that stillness, emotions start to resurface. The ones he said he didn't have anymore, the ones he thought he buried. He may try to convince himself and everyone around him that he's moved on. He might talk about how things ended, claiming it was for the best. He might even say, I don't think about her anymore. But silence tells the real story. When there's no message from you, no hint that you're still emotionally available, the illusion starts to crack. Silence is confrontational. It doesn't let him run. It brings memories back with full clarity. Not the painful ones he tries to use as justification, but the real raw moments, the closeness, the bond, the inside jokes. Things that are impossible to replicate with someone new overnight. When people are truly over something, they don't obsess about it. They don't need to prove they've moved on. They just live. But when someone is trying to fake detachment, silence becomes a trigger. Why? Because your lack of reaction forces them to sit with themselves. That silence, that total absence of you, takes up space. It invades the quiet moment, the late at night, early in the morning when no one's watching. That's when the facade fades, and that's when the emotional attachment he pretended not to have comes crawling back into the front of his mind. Emotional attachment doesn't just dissolve the moment someone walks away. It lingers, it clings to routines, to places, to songs, to scents, to memories that weren't supposed to mean anything but suddenly do. And without your words filling his world, those memories hit differently. They're not softened by your voice or made easier by knowing you're still around. They become sharp, real, undeniable. That's the trap of silence for someone who's still emotionally attached. It doesn't yell, it whispers, it creeps in, and those whispers are impossible to ignore. He might scroll through your old messages. He might visit your social media, pretending he's not checking. He might replay old voice notes in his head, even if he deleted them from his phone. That's what silence does. It amplifies the mind's ability to fill in the blanks. He starts wondering what you're doing, who you're with, if you've moved on, if you're thinking about him at all. The silence turns his questions into obsessions, not because you're sending mixed signals, but because you're sending none. And in that vacuum, his mind does the work your words used to do. People often assume that whoever appears to move on first is the one who's less affected. But the truth is, moving on isn't a performance. It's a process, and silence fast tracks that process, for better or worse. For you, it's healing. For him, it's confrontation. Because when he no longer gets to hear from you, he starts to realize what those messages meant, what your consistency meant, what your presence, even when things were tough, actually offered him. And now it's gone. Not angrily, not dramatically, just gone. And that is far more powerful than any goodbye speech ever could be. He can pretend your silence doesn't affect him. He can even convince his friends he's relieved. But eventually he'll face a moment when something small reminds him of you, a song, a place, a phrase, and he'll want to reach out. That urge is not random. It's emotional residue. It's attachment in disguise. And when he stops himself because of pride, ego, or fear of rejection, he only deepens the silence. But the longer that silence stretches, the heavier it gets. Because now it's not just about what you're not saying, it's about what he's not doing. That's where regret often starts to take root. He might start to wonder if you ever cared, if maybe you moved on first. That uncertainty, sparked by your silence, becomes a reflection of his own feelings. And that's the irony. He wanted to appear strong, detached, in control. Now, silence doesn't care about appearances. It's a truth serum. It dissolves ego and leaves emotion exposed. So the more he tries to act unbothered, the more his emotional attachment surfaces in private. Because the person who's truly detached isn't checking, isn't pretending, isn't performing. They're just living. And your silence makes that fact unavoidable. Silence is one of the most powerful tools you have, not as a game, but as a boundary. It tells him, without words, that you are no longer participating in the emotional loop, that you are choosing peace over explanation, dignity over reaction. And that choice is what challenges him, because for someone emotionally attached, silence isn't just absence, it's rejection. It's emotional independence, and that stings far more than anger ever could. When you stop showing up in the ways he was used to, it exposes how deeply he was depending on your presence, even when he claimed not to care. So he can fake moving on. He can act indifferent, but silence strips away the show. It removes the audience, the commentary, and the validation. And once all of that is gone, what's left is the raw, unfiltered truth that he still feels something. Maybe he's not ready to admit it. Maybe he'll never say it out loud. But silence doesn't need confession. It just needs time. And given enough of it, the emotional attachment he's been denying will rise to the surface, not because you said a word, but because you didn't. When someone is truly over you, they don't feel the need to broadcast it. They simply live their life. But when someone is faking detachment, they often perform their healing for others to see. He might show off how much fun he's having, post pictures with someone new, or talk about how free he feels now. But real detachment is quiet. It doesn't need validation. The louder he tries to appear unbothered, the more likely it is that he still cares. That performance is not about peace. It's about proving something. And when you stop engaging, when you go silent, it shakes that performance to its core, because the role he's playing depends on your attention. Without it, the act starts falling apart. Your silence removes the stage. When you stop reacting, there's no script left for him to play out, no push and pull dynamic to feed off. He was used to the drama, the tension, the chase. But silence, that's a different kind of challenge. It doesn't give him anything to manipulate. It doesn't give him power. Silence makes his efforts to seem happy look hollow. Suddenly, the attention he sought feels empty. The audience is gone. And without your presence, the things he once did to appear strong now just feel forced. It becomes clear that he's not living, he's acting. And the silence makes it obvious. It's easy to fake moving on when you're getting a reaction. When you know she's watching, you try harder to look unaffected. But when she's not, when she's completely silent, it turns the performance inward. He starts to wonder, is she watching? Does she care? Has she moved on before I did? That uncertainty eats at him because a performance without an audience is just noise. And that noise becomes deafening when there's no one there to admire it. That's when he starts to question himself. Not just the breakup, but the choices he's made since. Silence makes him reflect, not just on you, but on who he's pretending to be. People can only perform for so long before the mask slips. You can't keep faking peace when your heart is still restless. Eventually, the performance becomes exhausting, and that's when cracks begin to show. The nights get quieter, the fake laughs fade, the distractions don't hit the same. That's when the silence becomes more than just your absence. It becomes a mirror, and the reflection he sees isn't what he expected. It's not a man who's healed. It's a man still holding on, pretending to be fine, and there's no applause, no audience, no comfort, just truth. That's the power of silence. It doesn't expose him in public. It exposes him to himself. What most people don't realize is that detachment doesn't require effort. It doesn't involve proving your worth or acting like you're better off. It's a quiet inner shift. You no longer need to explain or justify. You simply are. And that energy is unmistakable. But he doesn't have that yet. That's why he's still performing, still posting, still reaching out in indirect ways. That's not healing, that's holding on. And when you stop feeding that, it collapses. His entire image of strength was built on the assumption that you'd still be watching, but you're not. And now he has to deal with the silence and the insecurity. The truth is, detachment isn't found in what you show, it's found in what you feel. A person who's truly let go doesn't obsess over how they're perceived. They're too focused on building peace. But when he fakes it, it's all surface. The clothes, the smiles, the stories. It's decoration without foundation. Silence strips that all away. It shows whether the foundation was ever really there. And for him, it becomes clear that it wasn't. Because the moment your voice disappears, so does his confidence. And that sudden drop reveals how much of his strength was tied to your presence. Even if he swore it wasn't, you become the proof that he hasn't moved on. Not by what you say, but by what you don't. You don't text to check in. You don't respond to his subtle bait. You don't fall for the polished image. And that silence feels like rejection, even though it's simply distance. A woman's silence has power because it shows emotional control. It communicates that you're not playing anymore. And that's terrifying to someone who relied on your attention. Because now he has no idea what's going on in your mind. That mystery drives him wild, not because he wants you back, but because he lost the ability to predict you. Control is a big part of emotional games. When he had your attention, he felt in control. He could gauge your reactions, test your limits, and feel needed. But silence removes all that. Suddenly, he doesn't know where you stand. Are you hurt? Are you healing? Are you done? The lack of answers forces him to sit in his own discomfort, and that silence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. It's not cold, it's clear. It tells him that you no longer need his version of closure, and that scares him, because when a woman no longer seeks answers, it usually means she's already found peace. He may try to reclaim that control. He might post something intentionally provocative or try to accidentally run into you. These are not signs of peace. They're symptoms of attachment. When someone has truly moved on, they don't need those games. They don't seek validation, but he does, because your silence is unsettling. It removes the one thing he thought he could always count on, your emotional availability. Now that it's gone, he's left with the realization that he didn't move on, he just tried to distract himself. And silence doesn't let that lie live very long. You don't have to prove anything. You don't need a counter performance. That's what makes silence so powerful. It doesn't compete. It doesn't chase. It simply exists. And in that stillness, truth rises. He realizes that silence doesn't just remove your presence, it removes your energy. And that's what he misses the most, even if he can't articulate it. Your energy was comforting. It gave him a place to fall, even when he pretended he didn't need it. When you stop texting, calling, and showing up in his world, he begins to notice not just your absence, but the absence of that emotional safety. He misses the way you listened, the way you made him feel understood. He misses the parts of himself that only showed up when he was around you. And silence creates the space for that realization to hit hard. Not suddenly, but slowly, through moments of discomfort that start to feel unfamiliar. Because what he misses isn't just you, it's how you made him feel. The truth is, emotional attachment often hides in the little things. The things we take for granted while we have them. The morning check-ins, the good luck texts, the random thoughts shared at midnight. When those disappear, it leaves a gap in the daily rhythm of his life. At first, he might not notice. He might even feel relief, thinking space will help. But over time, that space begins to ache. He doesn't miss the drama or the arguments. He misses the connection, the simplicity of having someone who just got him. And silence makes that absence louder every day. It's not an explosion, it's erosion, the slow wearing down of his emotional defense. He might pretend he's enjoying the freedom, that he likes being single, being unbothered, living on his terms. But emotional attachment has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it. He'll hear a song that reminds him of you. He'll drive past a place where you once laughed. He'll open his phone expecting a notification that never comes. And in those moments, the silence screams. It becomes more than quiet. It becomes emotional evidence. Evidence that you were real, that what you shared wasn't small, that it mattered more than he admitted. Because if it didn't matter, why does the silence feel so heavy? When you go silent, you take away the opportunity for him to use you as an emotional crutch. Whether he realized it or not, your presence was something he leaned on, maybe not always in obvious ways. Maybe he acted distant or cold, but deep down, he knew you were there. He knew that if he needed reassurance, you'd give it. That if he wanted to feel wanted, you'd show up. Silence removes that comfort. It forces him to stand on his own without the emotional safety net. And that's when he realizes just how attached he really was, not to your body, but to your care, your consistency, your compassion. This is where the emotional unraveling begins. He starts to revisit moments in his mind, analyzing what he said, what he didn't say, and how you responded. He starts wondering if he misunderstood how much you gave, because in the silence, he finally has the clarity to see what he missed when you were loud with your love. He remembers the way you were patient when he was short, tempered, the way you tried even when things were hard, the way you stayed even when he gave you reasons to leave. And now that it's all gone, the emotional weight of that love starts to land, not all at once, but in waves. Emotional attachment is tricky because it doesn't always feel like longing at first. It can feel like restlessness, frustration, or even anger. He might not say, "I miss her." Instead, he'll say, "Why hasn't she texted?" Or, Why does this still bother me? That confusion is emotional exposure. It's the silence doing its job, bringing his buried feelings to the surface. He might try to suppress them, distract himself, or lash out. But none of that removes the root. The root is emotional reliance. And silence reveals just how deep that reliance ran. Not because you forced it, but because he got used to your emotional presence. The irony is that silence isn't even about making him miss you. It's about reclaiming your own space. But in doing so, you give him the chance to see what life is like without your emotional influence. He sees what it's like to make decisions without your input, to face challenges without your support, to celebrate without your congratulations. And slowly, he realizes how much he relied on that, not because he was weak, but because you were strong in the ways he wasn't. And now that you're gone, he has to find that strength within himself. That's the emotional consequence of losing someone who anchored him. At some point, he may try to convince himself that he's better off, that he doesn't need anyone, that he's thriving, but that's just another version of avoidance. Emotional attachment doesn't disappear just because we decide it should. It lingers. It tests us, and the silence only deepens the test, because as more time passes, he's forced to confront the reality that your absence is not a phase. It's a choice, one that he didn't make, one that he didn't expect. And that loss carries weight, the weight of unfinished conversations, unspoken appreciations, and moments he didn't realize were golden until they became memories. Eventually, he stops checking his phone, not because he's over it, but because he knows you're not coming back the way you used to. And that realization hits harder than any argument or breakup ever could, because now it's not about words. It's about the silence that follows them. It's about how that silence doesn't just represent distance, it represents change, it represents growth. And he knows he's not a part of that growth anymore. That understanding leaves him with something heavier than regret. It leaves him with longing, not just for you, but for the version of himself that existed when you were still around. You become the echo in his quiet moments, the thought that slips in when he's alone. He may not tell anyone, he might not act on it, but that emotional attachment is still there, under the surface, waiting for a moment of weakness, waiting for a reason to reach out. And even if he never does, he'll always remember how your silence exposed something he thought he could hide, that he wasn't as detached as he claimed, that he did feel something real, and that when you walked away quietly, you took more than your voice. You took the version of peace he didn't know he'd miss until it was gone. Silence is not just the absence of sound, it's the presence of power. When you go quiet after a breakup, especially one where he thought he had control, it shifts the dynamic entirely. He expected emotion. He expected you to reach out, to question, to beg for clarity. But silence gives him none of that. It doesn't chase. It doesn't plead. And that absence becomes louder than any message you could have sent, because silence is hard to interpret. It leaves him guessing, wondering what you're thinking, how you're feeling, whether you're already moving on. And in that uncertainty, he loses the one thing he thought he had over you, emotional leverage. Control often comes from predictability. When someone can predict your emotions, your patterns, your reactions, they feel powerful. He knew how you'd respond when he pulled away. He knew how to bait you with mixed signals, how to stir just enough drama to keep the connection alive. But silence breaks that cycle. Suddenly, there's no reaction, no emotional fuel, no cues to follow. That's terrifying to someone who fed off your energy. Because when silence enters the space, it doesn't just confuse him, it confronts him with his own feelings, with the truth he's been avoiding, with the loss he tried to mask with ego. Beauty of silence is that it can't be manipulated. Words can be twisted, texts can be overanalyzed, conversations can be turned into battles of control. But silence offers none of that. It's pure, it's neutral. And that neutrality is unsettling for someone who depended on chaos to feel connected. He doesn't know what silence means. Is it strength? Is it indifference? Is it healing? That ambiguity forces him to confront a question he never thought he'd ask. Did she finally let go? And that question keeps echoing because silence doesn't give him an answer. It lets him wrestle with it again and again until the truth becomes clear on its own. People often think power lies in speaking up, in getting the last word, but sometimes power lies in choosing not to. And speak at all. Not because you're weak, not because you have nothing to say, but because you understand that some battles are won through restraint. Silence becomes a boundary, a firm, invisible wall that says you no longer get access to me. And that's not just a statement, it's a shift in energy. It removes his ability to affect you. And that realization that he no longer has an emotional hold shakes his confidence more than any argument ever could. He may test your silence. He might send breadcrumbs, small vague messages that don't say much but are meant to gauge your response. Or he might try to provoke you indirectly, hoping you'll break the silence first. But the longer you stay silent, the more desperate his attempts become. Because silence is a reflection. It holds up a mirror to his behavior. And if he's been manipulative, emotionally unavailable, or controlling, he now has to sit with that without distractions, without your emotional labor to soothe his guilt. Silence makes him feel the consequences of his own actions, and that discomfort is what creates growth, if he's willing to face it. The loss of control is rarely about you specifically. It's about what you represent. You were a source of emotional attention, validation, and stability. And when you stop giving that, he's left with his own emptiness. That's where the panic begins. Not because he suddenly realized your worth, but because he's starting to see how much of his confidence was built on your constant presence. Your reassurance, your forgiveness. And now all of that is gone, replaced by a void, a silence that doesn't just feel quiet, it feels like rejection, not a loud one, but a calm, decisive one. The kind that doesn't ask for closure because it is closure. Silence forces introspection. It turns the spotlight inward. While he may have spent the relationship focusing on your flaws, your emotional reactions, or your neediness, now he has no one to blame, no one to distract him. All he has is the silence and himself. That's where true reflection starts. He might deny it at first, try to convince himself that he's fine, that he's over it. But silence has a way of slipping through the cracks, showing up when he least expects it, in quiet mornings, in lonely nights, in moments when the world stops moving and he's left alone with the echo of what he lost. There's something powerful about not explaining yourself, about not defending your choices, about simply walking away and letting your absence do the talking. Because silence isn't passive, it's intentional. It communicates everything he refused to hear when you were still speaking. It says, I loved you, but I won't chase you. It says, you had access to me and now you don't. And most of all, it says, I've chosen myself. That's the kind of message he can't unhear. Even if he pretends not to care, even if he distracts himself, deep down, the silence stays with him long after the noise of distraction fades. Eventually, silence changes the narrative. At first, he may have seen you as emotional, reactive, or too invested, but now all he sees is strength. The strength to not engage, the strength to walk away without drama, the strength to prioritize peace over explanation. And that shift in perception is powerful because he begins to realize that the person he thought he had power over was never really his to control. You chose to give your energy. You chose to be present, and now you've chosen to be silent. That's not weakness, that's mastery. Emotional self-mastery. And once you step into that, there's no going back. Silence is not about getting him back. It's not about playing games or manipulating emotion. It's about reclaiming your power, your peace,